Today's an exciting day for the Mustang because we finally get to put that engine in there. I mentioned in the last build breakdown video and the last video you guys just saw about the transmission that we have to mount the motor next before we really do anything. The reason being that based on where the motor is determines where the front diff kind of sits. We have some adjustment with it, but we really need to see where the motor and the transmission are gonna line up to see what kind of angle we have with the front drive shaft and where the diff needs to be and where all the front axles line up. And so starting with that is the motor. I went ahead and did all the preparation we need, from putting the front timing cover on loosely. There's not even a oil-thin gasket. We're gonna reseal that. Putting the front motor plate on, also cutting the motor plate so it fits where we need it to fit. Taking the headers off. We'll probably have to end up taking the intake off. I did take the carb piece off, the throttle body piece off. And from last episode, the bell housing and stuff is still off. That should give us just enough room to slip it right under here, tie a strap around here, remove the jack stands, and then lower the car down onto the motor. When we do that, the car's sitting pretty level right now. So when we do that, it's gonna drop it down and it's not gonna be level when the motor is gonna be level on the ground. So we can't really base too many measurements off of that, but we'll get to see like the side to side and kind of the height of where it sits. Really right now we're trying to do is figure out the side to side and front to back. The height of it is whatever, we can cut more out. So we really just wanna see where it lines up with all the shock towers and where we need to weld those plates for the motor plate. This motor, also funny enough, from the factory, is offset center of the car 3/4 of an inch to the passenger side. So if you took the center line of the car and then moved it 3/4 of an inch to the passenger side, that's the center line of the motor. They do that from the factory. I don't know why, extra room for the driver, but it's 3/4 of an inch, so I don't know. I really don't know why they do it. When I went to cut the motor plate, I used some measurements based on where this front support beam is, based on where the shock towers are, the width of the frame rails back there, and how much room we needed for all the pulleys, and went ahead and cut 2 inches out of the entire thing, 1 inch on either side. What that should do is should keep the factory offset to the passenger side, which is gonna help us with how far we have to move the motor back, keeping it towards the passenger side and giving me as much room over there as possible. Now 3/4 of an inch isn't really gonna help us all that much. We probably wouldn't even really notice a difference, but based on how much little room I'm gonna have in there, I'll take anything I can get. This is about as close as I can get to the ground. The passenger side's falling a little bit faster. I think I have the strap a little bit off center, so it's falling a little bit faster, and we're already at the right height over here, but we're still quite a bit off. But a decent representation just to see how the motor fits in there. And honestly, it fits pretty perfect. On the back, we have plenty of room to clear the bell housing. The bell housing is only as big as the back of the block. And then depth wise, you know, the bell housing is only 8 inches, and obviously based on that transmission video, we're gonna have one that's hopefully 6 inches deep. So we got plenty of room there. There's definitely gonna be some little stuff we have to trim later, like based on what we do with the exhaust, we might bring it back through to the engine bay, so we might have to cut some out of the firewall. And then just little stuff here and there if we need to just take a little notch out of something. But for just the chunk, the main size of the motor, I don't think we could have cut it any more perfectly. I mean, we did the measuring and then cut based off the measurements, so you get good results when you take good measurements. But I'm also really glad that this is holding up because if it fell, because I didn't take the jack stands out because it wouldn't go low enough, and if it fell, I'm sure I could find another way to get it back up, but that would just be a pain. Yesterday you guys saw what the car looks like with the motor in it. I've lifted it back up and taken the motor out, and you saw what it had with the motor plate on it yesterday, but I went ahead and installed the pump just to see what it looked like, see how much room we do. I can do some measuring with it. In my spare time, I drilled some new holes and welded in the tabs for the motor plate. Now, unfortunately, the measuring that I was doing to get the motor where we wanted it, ideally, not needed it, but wanted it, we were gonna be about 4 inches from the face of that motor plate. I've welded the tabs 7 inches from this bar. The measurement I was taking was the cross beam of the car. So from the cross beam to the front of that motor plate, we wanted 4 inches. I welded the brackets that sit at 7. Now that shouldn't really affect things, how the rest of the motor's gonna fit like downstream with it being inside and the transmission behind it shouldn't affect it. Losing those 3 inches could hurt us in the future, but I kinda had to. The water pump that we have to use for this thing is about 6 1/4 inches thick. So I went with 7 just to give us a little bit extra room. Now they have shallow water pumps even for these motors and these bolt patterns. The only reason I kept it at the 7 inches was in case we ever went to an electric water pump. Those can stick out pretty far. And based on the fact that we're gonna have the radiator basically in the trunk, if we ever had to go to like a high flow water pump, they don't make shallow mount high flow water pumps. you can only get a high flow in the standard length. But it was just easier. I had these measurements to work with. It's the pump I have. And again, I don't really think it's gonna affect anything. It also leaves us a ton of room in case we wanted to ever add some extra power to this thing and needed an extra pulley or two, if you know what I mean. That's what it looks like when it's bolted into the car. I don't have the motor on it right now, but don't have really a way to lift the motor up. And then if you put the car down, it's all at an angle and weird. So we're gonna have to figure out how to get this thing in and out. Probably just gonna like jack it up from the bottom with like a plank of wood up under the oil pan. We'll figure it out. That's also how much room we have between the water pump and the support brace. I'd be lucky to say if we had an inch in between there, but the pulley should kind of sit farther back. It shouldn't stick out too much. So that's probably as close as it's gonna get, which if it clears as far as I'm concerned. The biggest issue coming out of this motor plate is the steering. It basically goes right through the motor plate. Having it a couple more inches forward was gonna help us, but now I'm not really sure what to do because even the main bracket that holds it on is basically in the way. I'm fine cutting a hole in the motor plate, but if the main steel bracket is in the way, I'm not really sure what to do about that. It's probably gonna be a case of us having to move that down and send the steering shaft that way. The problem is the steering shaft that goes to the steering rack is not at that angle. So that's gonna take a little bit of engineering, but like everything else, we'll figure it out. I think that's it for today. A lot of good progress. Every time we make progress, we find like 5 more issues. So that's never fun, but like I said, we'll figure it out. I'm just glad stuff is continuing to move along and that motor actually fits really good in the car. The next couple weeks, I'm gonna be doing a ton of off-camera progress just to knock some stuff out. Stuff you've already seen, just like the control. We got that other control arm in, so we need to make a new bracket for it and get more adapters, 3D printed. Oh, also, the CNC should be here in about a month and a half, so that's exciting. Tons of just little stuff that you guys have seen before that I'll just go ahead and knock out. Also, forgot to show you guys, we got a hydraulic hose in for the transfer case pump, and now we have a transfer case. So I don't know if I'll necessarily plumb it up outside the car, but basically as soon as the transmission goes in the car, or as we have it hooked up to the motor, we can basically go ahead and test that. We're also still making progress on the GSX-R 750. I think I mentioned that in the last video about the transmission. We have the fairings in. I'm about to mount those today actually, so that's the biggest part of that whole project. And then the bike won't be done, but it'll be back on the road fairly soon. So if you guys are excited for that, definitely look out for that video. As always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Before the video ends, I was editing it and it seemed just kind of like I was talking a lot, which I was. So I wanted to do a little bit more work and show you guys what it's actually gonna look like when it's in the car. So it's still sitting on the little stand that's normally on, but it's in the right spot. It's connected to the motor plate. It's got a couple bolts in it. It's got the motor plate bolts in it. This is where the motor's sitting. This is what it's gonna look like. We have to wait to connect the transmission to it to actually get it up in the car off the stand, because we have nothing supporting the back, and if you lift it up like this, it's just gonna break the plate. So we can't really do that today. Not a super huge update from what you guys just saw, but I wanted to give like kind of a final what it's gonna look like. I didn't really do that last week. So yeah, that's what it looked like. I got Jamal here today, so we're gonna be doing some cool stuff with the front suspension. Hopefully rolling the car out into the driveway. That's exciting, so look forward to that video next week.